Uh, this is class 8 of our issues in psychology, and we have Sal DePasquale and Terry Bordan here. And I'm going to just get out of the way and let them take it away.
I think you still need to mute everyone.
And I will mute everybody.
Okay.
Okay. There you go.
And Terry, if you will unmute.
Perfect.
Okay, go ahead, Terry.
All right. Today we're going to talk about depression, but speaking about how Sal prepares for courses, he found us an extraordinary video that we'll go to as shortly as possible, because I want to say a couple of things about depression, one especially that people don't know. How long do you think it has to be, you have to be depressed, and we'll talk about the signs of depression in just a moment. But how long do you think you have to be depressed, most days than not, before you want to seek professional help? So just think about what you'd answer. Most people answer 3 months. I've had students that answered 6 months. I've had students that answered 6 weeks, and rarely does anybody get it right unless they've, read up on it before. And the answer is a surprising 2 weeks. That's all it takes. 2 weeks of having certain symptoms, and I'll tell you about that in a second. 2 weeks of having these symptoms, most days, maybe every day, than not. And the other thing about depression that people don't know, and it gets them into a lot of trouble, and this is a biggie. Most people, when they seek counseling therapy, they seek it because they're depressed. They're sad. They're not in an elevated mood. They are in a sad mood. They may even seek it they don't. It's just basically sad. Even the ones anecdotally for me, no one's ever really come to me or any of my friends that I know of to say, I'm coming to counseling because I feel irritable. Not that I'm angry. The anger gets a lot of people to counseling. But I'm feeling a little more irritable than I have been. So here's the big point. So if most people come for counseling and they come when they're sad, and a lot of people go to the primary, they don't go to a specialist, a psychiatrist, or if they're on a lot of medications, they don't seek out a psychopharmacologist. And I would recommend everybody here, if you're on medications and you feel you might need some kind of mood-altering psychotropic medication, seek out a psychopharmacologist, because they are really Merlin the magicians here. They know the synergistic effect of drug A with drug B as opposed to drug C. But here's the point that I'm trying to get at, and I'm getting at it in a long way instead of the right way, which is the short way. If people come to counseling because they're sad, oftentimes what a doctor misses is that they might be bipolar. Because remember, they're coming when they're sad. And they might not have had, an elevated, excited, or irritable. A lot of people don't understand that there can be irritability in mania. They don't, if you're in full-fledged mania, you are hot. You don't need counseling. We'll talk about bipolar in a couple of minutes too. But can you imagine if you come to, let's say, someone who isn't familiar with asking the right questions, you could get medication for just plain old depression and you happen to be bipolar. And that's extremely dangerous. We've had people that have committed crimes and they have attributed it to being on the wrong medication. They were bipolar, but they were on the regular stuff that you're on for depression. And this all links back to when Sal brilliantly told us about the brain and what we now know about parts of the brain. And I found out something very interesting the other day as an aside. As older adults, our amygdalas are decreased. And the amygdala is what holds the pleasant experiences as well as your bad experiences. And if it decreases, we hold less bad experiences in our head than these young people do. So, a plus for the seniors. So remember that, please. If you're on a lot of medications and you think you might need a little something, seek out a psychopharmacologist. You all live in a huge city, Atlanta. There are plenty of them. I live in Carbondale. It has no civilization. I doubt that there's a psychopharmacologist within 100 miles because the Aspen people are just flying their private jets to where they have to go. And you only have to have these feelings, these symptoms for 2 weeks in order to seek help. And let's talk about the symptoms first for depression, because that video is going to show you real life people and educate you far better than anyone could. So obviously, an indication of depression is you're depressed. They always say don't define a word with the word, but I think we're safe here in saying depressed mood for most days, maybe the whole day. A disinterest in what you used to find so pleasurable, and you just don't care anymore. Let's say you were excited because you were in a bowling league on Tuesday night. You couldn't wait for Tuesday night and go bowling, and now you don't care whether you bowl, whether you don't bowl, and you probably don't even bowl. Tired, a lack of energy. So you can see some of these indicators are not only for depression, but for other things as well. A feeling of worthlessness, a feeling of guilt, an excessive feeling of guilt for all kinds of things. One of these days, Sal and I will put together something and we'll talk more about cognitive brief therapy. We'll talk about grief, complicated grief. We'll do some very interesting things. But again, he thinks the Balkans has nothing to do with personality disorders, so I won't be seeing you for a while. Difficulty concentrating, difficulty focusing, doing a lot of kind of daydreaming, just walking through life and not being there. And of course, suicidal ideation. Anybody with thoughts of suicide, you don't wait 2 weeks to see if it's a consistent thing. Thoughts of suicide, run, don't walk to a professional. So, and again, I reiterate that most people, even if they're bipolar, they come when they're feeling good. So a lot of the doctors don't understand there may be something more than just the depression. The psychiatrists do, and they know what to ask. Because you see, if you've had one episode of mania, real mania, or they call it hypomania, not, but, hey, I think I'm going to go and try out for America's Most Talented. And you're about as talented as I am. So if you've had just one experience like that in your life, and you're coming for depression, they are going to know the right things to ask to understand whether or not you're depressed or whether you're not bipolar. And there's a bipolar 1 and a bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 is just less of everything than bipolar 1. That's it. And now we have some stars, which is good. You know, they're stepping forward and they're saying, don't be ashamed. Catherine Zeta-Jones, bipolar 2. And they're stepping out with bipolar 1. They're stepping out a lot now with depression. So bipolar disorder. It's a disorder of severe mood swings, both depressed and mania, you know, being excessively, as I said, elevated or excited or irritable. A lot of people don't understand it can be irritableness as opposed to mania, crazy. Lasting for approximately, guess what? 1 week, that's all. And happening along with the same conditions. So isn't that interesting? It's just 1 week. And by the way, if you ever see anybody that's really manic, you don't have to wait a week. There's no reason that they would express and continue to express some of the things. I've heard patients before, and there were scientists. So it was founded in like a kernel of truth, how they were going to get the Nobel Prize. What are the signs of bipolar? Well, elevated self-esteem, a grandiosity. They have the solution to end all problems in the world. They'll end starvation. They'll end. They'll bring peace, a decreased need for sleep, or perhaps an increased need. They sleep too little. They sleep too much. A pressure, a need to talk, and they talk very rapidly, and they'll talk to you about, you know, Salah's going to be doing the Balkans War, and I remember, you remember now, we were told in the very beginning now that they want you to register and register pretty quickly. You know, my aunt never used to register pretty. So, you know, the pressured speech, flipping from one thing to another, racing, rapid thoughts, short attention spans. And again, all of these signs can be signs of this, or it can be signs of just other things. That's why you need to go to a good professional to, let's see, increased activity level. They'll mow their lawn at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm almost done. Engaging in potentially damaging and dangerous activities, being sexually promiscuous, gambling, shopping sprees. So for bipolar, the person has to have 1 episode of mania in his or her life, just one, and then experience the depressed mood. So can you see how you can get easily misdiagnosed if someone doesn't know the right things to ask? Now we're going to go to a video with people who are courageous enough to come forward and tell you about their lives. Take it away, Sal.
It's like a black cloak. If you feel like your brain is crushed, all you want is to be on your own, isolated.
Like a wheelchair in your head, Stephen.
Only someone who has had it knows how paralyzing depression can be.
You don't even want to go to the toilet. You don't want to make yourself food. Never mind looking in the mirror to see what your appearance is like.
No one is immune.
You just get to a point where you just think, you know what, I'm too much of a burden.
It's so terrifying, and you are in an absolute inner turmoil of despair.
There's a 1 in 4 chance that depression will affect you at some stage in your life.
Don't tell me to put myself together and get myself on. Don't hurt me because I've got an illness called depression. Understand me a bit more. Don't be hard on me. Don't stigmatise me.
It's bad enough to get it, but the stigma can make you feel much worse. This is the truth about depression. Cathal is facing a milestone. It's his 40th birthday, and he's putting on a good front.
This club for me is familiar to me, so it is. It is one of my safety nets. So I'm comfortable with this actual arena here that we're in tonight. But it's at its limits. The sooner I get home and out of these silly clothes, like the better. I get a cup of tea in front of me, and it'll probably take me a long time to wind down the night. I don't know if I'll get sleep because I'm on a high now, but I don't know, maybe the low will come shortly after it, I don't know.
For the past 20 years, Cathal has battled with chronic depression.
If and when I'm told I've got an incurable condition sometime later on in life, I'll accept it better. But it will be nothing compared to the death that I have lived the whole of my life. Every day I have went through death with this depression.
It is extraordinary that thousands of us in Northern Ireland will suffer from depression, and yet so many people will feel the need to hide it. Why? Because of the stigma. People with depression are judged to be weak. Some people even go so far as to think it does not exist. I wanted to find out the real truth about depression. Cathal's depression hit him suddenly when he was a student coming home from Belfast.
I remember shouting at the bus driver, stop, and I had to get off.
What was happening to you?
There was a fear, a cloud just came all over me, so it did, sheer panic, rush of emotions, and I didn't know, Stephen, it was like a deathly feeling, so it was, and I had to get out. So I was stranded on the side of the motorway and I rang for my father to come and pick me up, and that was the start of my mental health problems.
Cathal didn't leave the house for a year.
It's not a thing you want to turn around and say to somebody, I think you're mental, you know, which undeniably I am. Whatever way you want to butter it up, I have a mental health problem.
Are you frightened of saying that out loud?
No, I'm not afraid to say it now, you know. I've absolutely no fear of that stigma that's attached to it, like, you know, accepting the fact that I have a severe mental illness was the first thing in curing myself.
But for those not able to see their depression as an illness, it is really important to show what is actually happening inside the head. Examining the brain through imaging is a relatively new area of science. It's only been studied over the past 15 years or so. I've come to the University of Manchester, one of the main centres in the UK for brain imaging. The part of the brain responsible for memory and emotion is the hippocampus. It is here that depression shows up. What's fascinating is that the hippocampus in depressed people behaves differently than the hippocampus in those without the illness.
So this is a cut through the brain, and I've just outlined in black the areas which were...
Professor Ian Anderson is leading the research.
There's been quite a number of studies which have suggested that people who are depressed don't just have an alteration in how the brain's working, but also actually in the structure of the brain. And the hippocampus has been one of the areas that's been most found to be smaller in people with depression.
Smaller?
Smaller.
So you've got the hippocampus, which is this part of the brain which deals with emotion.
Yes, and memory, yes.
And if someone develops depression, are you telling me part of the hippocampus, the grey matter, shrinks?
Well, that's what we've found. So a bit like if you don't exercise, your muscles shrink. Maybe the same happens with the brain. If a bit of the brain that's important isn't functioning so well, that area becomes essentially smaller.
Professor Anderson explained to me how his studies show this change in the brain and how treatment affects it.
Our group of patients were people who had been depressed for on average about 5 months, and the sort of people who'd be getting treatment from their general practitioner. And what we found was that if we looked at the hippocampus, we found a striking decrease in the amount of grey matter, that's the part of the brain that's got nerve cells and the connections between nerve cells in people who are depressed. And this was about a 25% decrease. So it's quite a striking and a staggering change, in fact.
Well, you're dead right, it's staggering. So people with depression in your study had 25% less grey matter than those non-depressed people.
In this area of the hippocampus, that's right.
I find it amazing that the brain shrinks when you're depressed, and that it is actually possible to see those changes for yourself.
What we found after 8 weeks treatment is that we had a significant increase in the amount of grey matter in these areas.
That's what the yellow dots are
So
showing.
these yellow dots are the increase, but it was nowhere near back to normal. This increase is only the order of a few percent. So you're still way down compared to how you would be normal. But if we then look at a group of people who've been well for years, we find that it goes completely back to normal. So somewhere between 8 weeks and a few years, the brain seems to recover fully in people who recover and stay well.
So, I'm sorry to make this so simplistic, but the better chance you give yourself at recovery, in other words, treatment, getting the right advice, whether it is talking therapies, whether it's antidepressants, over a longer period of time, the better chance you have of growing all of that grey matter back.
That's what we'd think.
For those of you who are doubters, there is evidence that depression actually exists in the brain. It wasn't always the case. In the past, people with the illness sometimes disappeared for months at a time.
Let me just give you a sense of the stigma that there was in terms of the infrastructure. So the main hospitals were located very close to Belfast city centre. You've got to go a lot further out for the hospitals for infectious diseases. And then outside of Belfast, in the depths of the countryside, the old lunatic asylums. This is Holywell Hospital. It was actually built about 120 years ago for patients who were mentally ill to find sanctuary. The Belfast Asylum was at bursting point and they needed somewhere like this. Now, it would be said that when people come out here, big sweeping driveways in the middle of nowhere, but once they turned that corner, they wouldn't be seen for quite a while. And actually, that's where the phrase comes from, going round the bend.
In the past, people with depression were called lunatics. I've been looking through the records of the old Belfast mental hospital that used to be here in Knockbracken.
Here's John, 11th of May 1944, the war years. And look, he came in here with a ration book and an identity card. John didn't have much else. He had one pair of socks, one shirt, and a gas mask. Here's Charles, came in 1941. Not very many possessions marked down here at all. He had one vest, two pair of socks, one shirt. Look what it says up the side. Deceased, no friends. All property to be destroyed.
This new ward in Knockbracken doesn't even look like a hospital. Things are very different these days. Heather had no history of depression. Everything was great. She was newly married and loved her job as a nurse. She was a first aider on a summer camp, and then one day her life changed forever when a child suddenly became ill.
The child came to me saying that he was feeling short of breath and things just deteriorated very quickly.
What happened?
I don't really want to go into this too much.
But don't go any further than you want to.
He just had a severe asthma attack on the field, and we rang for an ambulance. But by the time the ambulance got there, we had to start, before they arrived, we had to start CPR. And
I can see the pain in your face now. So obviously that's a really traumatic event in your life. And essentially, Heather, a little boy died in your presence, and it's something that the majority of us will never experience.
yeah, you know, when you're having a camp and it's all supposed to be fun, you never think that anything like this would ever happen.
At the time of the child's death, Heather was pregnant. Her depression began when she became a mother herself.
I was starting to panic over things. I'd never panicked before, and I couldn't catch a breath. My heart was racing in my chest. I was having chest pain and just couldn't breathe.
Were you sleeping much?
No, I couldn't sleep. My head was filled with thoughts of just, thoughts of what happened, thoughts of things that could happen. Was something going to happen to my child? And I would sit and watch her at night.
Heather felt she had to cover up her illness.
On the outside, when I went out through the doors, I gave people the impression that everything was okay, because I didn't want people looking down on me or saying, oh, it's just attention-seeking behaviour, and what people were going to think about me.
Dusk is dawn, stay.
America always seems to be a few steps ahead of us in medical matters, and I wanted to find out what they were doing. So I headed off to Missouri.
Fast and slow. Moving in still frame.
ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, has got a bad reputation, thanks in part to films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in the 1970s. If not a little bit heavy. Hello, Dr. Conway. Hey. I'll tell you what, you turn that on and I'll be suing you for millions, Dr. Conway.
Low.
I wasn't going to have the treatment, of course, but I was curious about it and how it worked. It's hard to understand how a bolt of electricity to the brain could help depression.
The whole point of ECT is to induce a seizure. What a seizure essentially is a massive discharge of neurons in the cortex moving in a wave.
And why would you want to do that? How does that help depression?
Over time, when you repetitively do this, when you repetitively induce these seizures, it's signaling to the different parts of the brain that are responsible for maintenance of mood to produce the normal amount of receptors on the neurons so that they go back to normal, sort of compared to defibrillating a heart.
In other words, it's like a computer reboot to the brain.
Usually about after 5 treatments or so, the person starts to feel not depressed.
Why the controversy if it's all proven?
I think the whole idea of introducing electricity into someone's brain is a frightening thing. And the type of ECT that's sometimes pictured in movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, we've come such a long way since then. So it's very safe now, and some people would even argue it's safer than medicine, because very, very few people have any problems with it.
Dr. Chris Kelly is one of Northern Ireland's leading experts in depression. He's been working as a psychiatrist for 30 years. ECT doesn't seem to have the same scary reputation nowadays. In the city hospital in Belfast, Chris carries it out on around 5 patients a week.
We don't use ECT a lot. It's only for the more severe or refractory forms of depression, or perhaps when an individual has had a particularly good response, we would use it. So it is a very rarely used treatment, but still the strongest treatment that we have. And it's really used more as a life-saving treatment to relieve extreme suffering when no other treatment has really worked.
Anne has had ECT in the past.
When you come out, Stephen, you feel in a daze, and you feel your head's not thinking. And then through time you feel that this depression's lifting and you feel elated. You feel, God, I'm not in this black hole. I feel like I'm alive again. But it only lasts for a certain time, Stephen, because depression is so severe an illness. It doesn't cure it.
Anne has had a serious mental illness for the past 40 years. On top of that, she has depression.
How does the depression make you feel?
It feels that you're just totally alone. You're totally alone within your head. And then maybe you get up when you dress and you wash and you look the part and all, say, God, you look well today. But inside your head, you're so depressed. You feel tired, you feel lethargic. You feel you put the kettle on to make a cup of tea and you haven't got the energy to even make a cup of tea. You feel so depressed, life is just going on around you and you don't know what's happening to you. My sister suffers from MS and I'll say, but her head's all right. She's a physical disability. Everybody can see that and help her. But to think, oh, Monty Ann's all right. Our Ann's all right. But our Ann's not all right. Our Ann has this black hole in her head. Like a wheelchair in your head, Stephen.
Okay. So.
Anne knows only too well the stigma that...
You can see what's new, which is the electrical stimulation, which goes back to what Ted. Oh my God, I wonder if that's Freudian. That was my late husband's name. I just called Sal my late husband. All right, therapy for me. Brain stimulation, and that goes back to what Sal was talking about for the first several classes, that it's mental conditions, and Freud said it, Freud knew it. It's no different from a heart condition or having diabetes, it's just being sick from the neck up. And once we figure out what we need to do to get it back to being okay, a person can live a very nice functioning life. So you can see that there are some people that would be on an antidepressant for the rest of their lives, and there would be other people that would possibly need an antidepressant for recent widowhood. I certainly can relate to that, or other conditions. And once the conditions, if they can, have passed, they might be reevaluated to see if they need maybe a lower dose or nothing at all. But the stigma still remains, and that's what we have to work on. We have to work on people realizing that mental disorders are the same as physical disorders, and they will be treated either with drugs, with talk therapy, or with stimulation to the brain. And that's the newest thing, and they're coming up with all different types of stimulation. The one that we're most familiar with, sadly, is the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, ECT, which has frightened a lot of people from ECT. because a lot of people with refractory depression have benefited greatly from ECT, but it's not just one treatment. Anyway, we wanted to keep this as short as possible today so that we could open it up to questions that you have about any of the sessions that we've given to you.
So if anybody has questions, oh my gosh, Dave Marcus does already. Dave, if you could unmute.
I had a
And
question. There was somebody I knew who got ECT or got electric shock therapy back in the 60s, and she seemed to have a lot of issues. Is the technology improved, or she just had issues?
The technology is improved, and very often there's comorbidities with depression, as they alluded to with one of the gals that we saw in the session. And it's not just a one-shot deal. It has to be continuous. So who knows? But yes, they're coming up with new ways to stimulate the brain. It's a very exciting new field of medical science. So, yep, we're getting better at it. Remember, we used to do lobotomies. Yeah.
hey, Terry, I was wondering, till we get some other questions coming up, I was wondering, of course, we know that depression and whatever, it can be associated with life events. Can it also be associated with medical issues? So things that affect the rest of your body, can that lead into depression or whatever?
Absolutely. Cancer, Parkinson's. Now, do they
Is
lead
that because
to
it's a physiological thing, or is it because you're being traumatized?
That's what they're looking into. Is it something that the physical condition has done to alter the brain chemistry? Because when you're on an antidepressant temporarily, it's basically just to kind of get your brain back to normal and then go on with your life. And we know that there are many psychiatric conditions that result from traumatic occasions. And a traumatic occasion could be that you've lost your hand in a factory accident. Traumatic occasions can be that you just got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And we know that we just have to know much, much more than we do now. We know that there's biology in it, there's environmental stuff in it. Is the person that develops a mental disorder because his hand got cut off in the factory, but did he have some kind of genetic predisposition to get this? If his life had been just roses and easy for the rest of his life, would he have gotten it? We don't know. We don't know, but absolutely there is definitely a correlation, and it could be a cause as well. They're looking into it. There are certain diseases. I hate to mention some of the diseases because some people have, we all have, you get to be a certain age and you got some conditions. I have so many conditions. I tell people I'm surprised I don't have a prostate condition. And I don't want people to think, oh, she mentioned I have that. Ooh, I have that. So I don't like doing that because people are highly suggestible and then they start to worry and think.
Yeah,
But
I'm wondering
the
if
answer is absolutely, the answer is absolutely yes.
So my husband went through cancer treatments and stuff, and so we were in the infusion unit at the hospital, and I mean, chair after chair of these people with cancer, that's got to be, so traumatic. I'm wondering, is there any push to kind of get more mental health services in locations like that? Yeah, because not only are they going through the illness itself, but then they're also going through in many times, trauma of the treatment, which can be just as big a deal as the illness itself.
Absolutely. And I think we need to educate the medical personnel so that they can have these discussions with their patients, so the patients know that they're not alone in their thoughts or some of the things that are disturbing them, and that there can be help. You know, years ago, we always used to say, oh, sure, grandpa's depressed. Grandma's dead. All his friends are dead. Yeah. Oh, well, of course she's depressed. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Of course she's depressed. But that's not our philosophy anymore. Depression, being down in the dumps, is not a part of normal aging. And that's what we have to get people to appreciate. And we have to destigmatize going to counseling, because we still have that in people of our ages. I'm your age. I'm an older adult. I spoke with this one woman when I lived in New York and in the development, and she gets horrible depressive episodes periodically that last for many months. And I said, have you gone to anybody for help? You know, there's drugs that you can take that after a couple of months, if they work, you feel much, much better. And you just wait for it to end naturally. No. Drugs are for crazy people. And that's what a lot of people still think.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that, when we looked at the animations about the brain and, the synapses firing off and all of that, what you get is it takes the synapses to trigger the release of chemicals that will make you feel good or make you feel bad. And so often what you find with depression is there can be a very natural feeling of feeling bad. But the problem is when it persists for a long time. What we may see is the event that precipitated the depression. That person may be ruminating on that event, not getting past it, long, complicated grief, so that they continue to have the chemicals that are making them feel bad and not getting the chemicals that would kind of lift them out of that. So I think it's very important to try to first understand what is the root of that depression, where is it coming from, so that you can kind of evaluate it. One of the things that we learn is that the neurons in our brain will be storing things that may have gone before our lifetime. So that trigger of depression may be very difficult to get in touch with, to find out what it is. For many older people who will feel depression, they will be from things that may have occurred early in life, but they were able to shield themselves from it because they had their life. They were engaged in school, work, many other things. Then they come to retirement and they don't have those distractions. They have a lot more time. And those things from many, many years ago emerge. And that may be the real cause of the depression. So it's difficult to deal with, but you've got to identify what is triggering this, because it's not just triggering your thoughts are translating into what happens with the synapses and the chemicals that are released.
That's why there's so much of a connection sometimes between depression and PTSD. And if you really want to get into other things that you either believe or you don't believe, Brian Weiss, who wrote the book Many Past Lives, Many Masters, he's a psychiatrist in Miami. He found that for a lot of his patients, when he did past life regression, something happened in a past life that affects them in this life. I know a lot of you don't believe it. I know a lot of you do believe it, but just throwing it out there because that's also a possibility.
Margita, what do you have?
I'm intrigued by the claim or the discovery that depression shrinks the hippocampus. And if I paid attention properly, it said that the hippocampus has a main function in memory, storing memory. So my question is, okay, when you're depressed, especially if it's depression caused by traumatic events, wouldn't you want to decrease those memories to shut them off? So isn't that what the hippocampus is doing? It's shutting you off from the traumatic memories, but apparently not, because you say there's also ruminating. It would to me, it would seem like the hippocampus would get larger because you're ruminating your old memories. So this is, I don't quite understand the concept, and I wonder, does anybody understand those dynamics?
That's why there's talk therapy, so that when you do ruminate, when you do obsess, when you do play those tapes in your head, that's going to affect what's going on in the brain. You have a different way of thinking about that. So it's not that we give you amnesia. By the way, ECT, a lot of people have quite a bit of amnesia with it. But back to our discussion. So it doesn't take away and you don't remember anymore, but you think upon it differently. But Sal experiencing PTSD, I'm sure, would like to say something. Sal? No. Yeah. So, but isn't it interesting how it all links back to what Sal discussed at the beginning of this semester, the brain. It's physical. So yes, rumination, bad. Thinking about it differently, good. So many times thinking about it differently gets you not to think about it at all. Does that make sense? Helps with the gray.
I'm still not getting, I mean, it seems to me that, okay, so ruminating destroys the hippocampus, making it smaller, which would mean to me the capacity to form factual memories or in a healthy way. So is there perhaps too much use of whatever's going on in the hippocampus by ruminating that destroys the good parts that it was made for? You know what I'm saying? It seems like counterintuitive, but
yeah, this is why we have people with doctoral degrees working on this stuff, because it is
And
so complicated.
They're young. One of the reasons I retired is it's a totally different field now, totally different field. Although I could have stayed and just taught the courses that weren't changing, but I got out. But yeah, by the way, I'm sorry I forgot your name, but the last gal, you don't do
Margita.
Margita?
Sorry, Margita, you don't do well on multiple choice tests. You think too much.
Gisela, what do you have?
I enjoy that though. Not the multiple choice. I enjoy thinking.
3 years ago, one Sunday morning, I came downstairs and found my husband dead on the floor. And after the initial shock and, you know, the EMT and fire department came and took him away, but it was like I just suddenly froze. And then I went into a complete frenzy of activity. And I just wondered if this is normal.
Yes, I can speak to it personally. My husband got diagnosed a little bit before Thanksgiving and he died January 1st. So it was just a handful of weeks. And I coped with becoming a mummy, freezing up. If you had spoken to me on the phone, I would have been able to tell you what was going on with my husband as if I were giving a weather report. It's a coping mechanism, so it is absolutely perfectly normal. Some people, you know, I still, inside of me, I want to sob out loud, and I don't. So it's just the way we've learned to cope with life, but perfectly normal, freezing and then just, you know, going hither and thither. I did the worst thing possible. I moved away from my social support system. So yes, our ego is better than we think it is. It really does help us cope more than we know. You know, if sometimes you just have to shut down. That's why sometimes someone who's been caring for a very ill relative, the relative dies and they faint and they decompensate and they get to the point where they're cuckoo, but they didn't do that prior because they couldn't. They couldn't. But once you can, you do.
Yeah, let me just add something, and that is, when people are facing a situation like that, the defense mechanisms of the psyche kick in, and there's many different ones, and they work in different ways, and that it kind of helps to explain how people react to a moment that is shocking to them, very difficult for them. You know, one of the problems from a law enforcement side is that you have people who will, investigators who will say, did you see that reaction? You know, you know, we got no react. The person was just like catatonic. Well, mind you, the defense mechanism of denial is a very powerful one. So you can tell someone, you know, knock on the door, there's been an accident and you've lost so and so, and that person doesn't react. And you think, what's wrong with them? Well, you know, it has not sunk in. Other people, to avoid dealing with that emotional distress, become involved in activities that distract them, that get them away from, I don't have to confront them. All perfectly normal. The immediate effect of a shocking occurrence is it's very common. Yeah.
I just want to add, I'm so sorry. I just want to add that I'm so sorry for your loss, and
thank you. You too.
May always be a blessing. Thank you.
I would say that Gisela's case was special too, because it was reported on all of our news agencies, which made it even, I think, a bigger thing to deal with.
Yeah, it was something I couldn't escape.
Yeah,
there
it was there all the time.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
And how are you doing now? Are you okay now?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
I'm really not. As a matter of fact, I'll share with everybody, I have the newest diagnosis of the DSM-5. The new one is not protracted, but prolonged bereavement disorder. That's what I have. Yeah. Thank you. And also to share with people, I take Xanax to sleep. We've got to destigmatize. And I also take Lexapro as an antidepressant. We have to destigmatize the taking of drugs.
Yeah, very difficult. James, what do you have?
I was on a board of Western New York Mental Health, And we got, there was a magazine that was turned out by the people at in mental health throughout the state. And there was one issue in which they covered people who had had shock treatment. And every person said they hated the experience and were against it, but every one of them said they improved after the treatment. And I was wondering, this was in the 70s. I'm wondering if the treatment has improved, or why was that the case?
Yes, it has improved. And also, if they really were helped tremendously, they would have said, I'd do it again 100 times. So, you know, the trauma of it, you know, the risk reward, who knows? But yes, things are different now, but too many people remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. As a matter of fact, I've never met anybody that didn't remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, yeah, it was very interesting. And I've also talked to a person who had shock treatment. I think she had hers in the 60s. And she just said, I told the doctors anything they wanted to hear because I didn't want to have those treatments again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, double wow.
That's kind of dangerous, actually.
I'm going to look just on the internet, see if I see something about, you know, patient experiences with ECT. And now they're doing they're also doing different kinds of brain stimulation too.
Yeah.
It's really it's improved. And first, I mean, did you hear the people talk about depression? It's a death. You live a death, and you're willing to do just about anything to get out of living a death. And that's why one of the scariest symptoms of someone who may be at great risk of committing suicide is suddenly they're much better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that's all about, because they have a plan to leave this life of death. So they're okay. That's pretty scary. You know, you want to congratulate somebody. Oh, you're doing so much better, Betsy. And then, you know, 3 days later, Betsy, or that same day, Betsy, commits suicide. We don't respect suicide enough, and there's a stigma with suicide too that we've got to get rid of. You know, the people still say, I don't understand why she killed herself. She had money, she looked okay. But gee, I would have liked her life. What the hell does she have to go kill herself for? They don't appreciate the illness.
What other questions or comments do we have before we finish out here? This has been an enlightening and fascinating series of classes that we've had delving into all these different issues and their genesis. You know, we generally think about the byproducts of any of these illnesses, but we don't ever discuss very much where they come from or that kind of thing. So this has been really, really interesting. I'm going to give you one more chance at any last questions. Hearing,
thanks everybody.
Yeah, hearing none, I'm going to.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Thank you.
Say,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sal. Thank you, Terry.
Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been
Thanks.
a really outstanding series, and thank you so much. And with that, we're going to close up.